Good evening. We are about to begin, and we are grateful to those in the community who have taken time to learn more about the candidates before casting their vote or attending or watching candidate forums. For those in attendance today, we request a couple of things: that you do not take photos or video during the forum. It is a distraction to other members of the audience and to the candidates. Please listen attentively. Turn off your phones and electronic devices. Avoid commenting or disrupting others during the forum, and please refrain from applause until the end of the forum, end of each forum. Thank you.
Okay. Welcome to all of you who have joined us for the 3rd Congressional District of Illinois Candidate Forum, and welcome to the candidates, John Booras and Delia Ramirez. I'm Roberta Barrino. I'm your impartial moderator. I hail from Congressional District 8, so out of the district. A few words first. The League's purpose is to promote civic responsibility through the informed and active participation of citizens in government and civil civic discourse. Throughout its history, the League of Women Voters has been providing opportunities for candidates seeking public office to speak directly to the voters through forums. A forum is not a debate. A forum is not the place for personal attacks or negative campaigning. The League of Women Voters strongly encourages candidates participating in a forum to use their allotted time when answering questions to inform voters of their goals, ideas, and positions. Voters will base their decisions when casting their ballot on what a candidate will specifically do if elected to office, not what their opponent won't do. So, all the candidates this evening have agreed to abide by the ground rules established by the League. These rules specify the format, time limits, broadcasting of the forum, and other rules related to the conduct of the forum. Candidates are expected to accurately represent the facts, and the responses reflect their own views and opinions. The League of Women Voters is not responsible for the accuracy of statements made by candidates. It is the responsibility of the public, news media, opposing candidates et al., to fact-check statements made by candidates if necessary. The candidates will begin in alphabetical order with their 2-minute opening statements. They will then alternate the order in which they answer the questions for 2 minutes. After the question portion of the forum, each candidate will give a 2-minute closing statement, continuing our alternating pattern. A member of the League will be acting as timer, and I will enforce the time limits. Candidates, you will see a slide, well, actually it's a paddle, to let you know you have 1 minute, 30 seconds, and stop. Should a candidate exceed the time limit, I will ask them to finish their sentence and move on to the next candidate. To ensure that questions for tonight's forum represent a balance of topics, a panel of experienced members of the League of Women Voters have reviewed the questions submitted for appropriateness and to avoid duplication. Finally, I want to say how appreciative we are of the candidates who are not only willing to serve in office, but who agree to be here tonight to share their ideas and goals. So let's get started. Candidate Booras, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you very much to the League of Women Voters for giving us the opportunity to speak to everyone. My name is John Booras, and I am running for United States Congress in the 3rd District. I would like to tell you a little bit about myself and kind of why I got into this, and then proceed through the rest of the night to answer any and all questions that the League has and that you might have as well afterwards. So I am the son of 2 Greek immigrants, a first-generation American. I am the first person in my family to own a home, the first person in my family to graduate high school, let alone college. So I am very much a product and thus a big believer in the American dream. I am a husband of 17 years. I am father to 3 wonderful children, my daughter who's 12, my 2 boys who are 8 and 10 years old. Really wish they could have been here today, but unfortunately soccer takes precedence in this family. And it is my family in particular that got me into politics. The way that America has been run at the federal level is simply unacceptable. We have excessively suffered from radicalism and the lack of partisan debate and partisan working together. That is something that I intend to fix from day one. I'm a former police officer. I'm a property tax attorney. Both of those jobs in particular require results. And the bottom line for me is I have zero interest in walking into Congress, collecting some kind of paycheck, and not bringing results back. I can guarantee you one thing. If you vote John Booras, you will see results coming out of the 3rd District in Washington. Thank you.
Thank you, Candidate Booras. Candidate Ramirez, you have 2 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. I want to start by also thanking the League of Women Voters for tonight's forum. And recognizing that today is also Rosh Hashanah, I want to say happy holiday to everyone celebrating that's here today. Folks, during my first term in Congress and my 4 years in the state legislature, I have worked really hard to be an effective legislator. I don't believe in the excuse that if you're in the minority or the majority, you can't get things done, especially if you're in the minority. And it's why, as a lifelong resident in this district, I've dedicated my career to public service. And it's why, since I got to Congress, I've worked really hard to deliver for this district. And as a coalition builder, as an unapologetic leader committed to values of equity and inclusion, I've worked across the aisle for the common good, the way that I have for veterans and for housing. And so when I first ran, I promised to be accessible, I promised to be accountable, and I promised to deliver. It's why in my very first term in Congress, I've secured $14.1 million to bring back to the district. We've closed 2,700 constituent cases in this first 22 months, 900 just in DuPage. We've had 100 community events across the district. I'll tell you, my staff will tell you under mileage that has happened, in fact. And I'm co-leading legislation from immigration, housing, healthcare. And in that first year, I passed the very first bill, a bipartisan bill, co-led by the Republican chairman, to ensure that veterans who've been defrauded by for-profit schools are able to get their benefits back. I believe that we deserve a member of Congress that's going to do the work, that's going to deliver. It is what I'm doing and what I intend to do in the 119th Congress.
Great, thank you. Now we start with the questions. The first one goes to Candidate Ramirez, and it regards voting rights. Should voting rights be addressed at the federal level? Why or why not?
Absolutely, yes. It is where it needs to be addressed. Folks, look, I am a co-sponsor of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. The fact that we haven't been able to pass it in this Congress, a Congress that's been unfortunately the most dysfunctional, we believe, since the Civil War, it's quite heartbreaking. The reality is that we should be doing everything we can to protect people's right to vote, to protect citizens' right to vote. And I know that Joe Biden won the election in 2020, and we need to make sure that we're working to expand voting rights, making sure that we secure and we continue to secure fair and free elections. It's why I don't take corporate PAC money, because I think it's really important that when we're talking about democracy, we are ensuring that lobbyists are not getting involved in the work of democracy. And it is also why I'm helping lead legislation for campaign finance reform, because I think that big money in politics is a threat to our democracy. And folks, look, you've heard it over and over. We are at a place that I don't believe many of us thought we would be. There is a true threat to our democracy. There are folks that are unwilling to accept the results of a 2020 election, and folks that are saying they don't know that they will accept the outcome if it's not theirs in 2024. And so it is our responsibility, and I believe that in the first 100 days of the next Congress, that we pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and we protect and expand democracy.
Thank you. Candidate Booras, the same question. Should voting rights be addressed at the federal level? Why or why not?
I do not believe voting rights should be addressed at the federal level. I believe, although voting rights are extremely important It is something that is designated to the states. We have a government, a republic style of government. It is purposely set up so that each branch handles different items that have been designated to it. The state, and anything that is not handled by the federal government needs to be directly handled by states. We see states in particular that have had certain issues, certain problems. You can go to Georgia and find excessive problems that have occurred in voting. And I agree, there is a strong pull to want the federal government to jump in and ensure that everything goes smoothly. But there is a problem with that. And that, one, the federal government has not been given that right. And two, is that we cannot simply change course in this country just because we have feelings or we see one certain small problem. What we have to do is address these issues individually through the states as they come up, but not something that we give in and completely alter the federal government to jump in and handle.
Just say we're going to start this question with you. Okay.
Thank you. The next question, candidate Booras, you start. Do you think we need federal tax reform? And if so, what do you recommend?
Thank you very much. I do believe we need federal tax reform. We have reached a point where taxes in particular have become a very, very serious problem for everyday Americans. I personally, especially as a tax expert, I work taxes across the nation. So I have worked with the tax system in every single state, typically dealing with real estate taxes, but also in other taxes as well at times. Taxes in particular in the United States have, one, way too many loopholes for certain individuals to exit through and not get to pay taxes. But at the same time, the progressive tax is simply failing us. We have to take a step back as a country and start talking about a flat tax so that we can tax people evenly and accordingly and not punish people for making too much money and try to get people to a point where we have to end up creating a bunch of different loopholes and ways out for certain individuals to take part in. I do believe that we can come up with that kind of a system, but I believe that it requires a serious amount of work and that we have to take genuine professionals who understand that process versus to just give in and want something like the rich to just pay their fair share. Because as we know, that's not going to end up working. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez.
Yeah, thank you for that. Let me start by saying that poor people, working class people, and middle class people are not paying the same tax that rich people are. So let's just be very clear here. When we talk about a flat rate, it means that you are saying that if you make less than $50,000 a year, you're going to be paying pretty much the same as someone that's making $500,000 a year. That's not how progressive tax works. That's not how the fair tax that we were trying to pass here in the state legislature would work. It is based on how much you make, and the formula is dependent on that. The reality is that in 2025, we're going to have an opportunity to reform the tax system. Under President Trump, we saw the most historical tax cuts to corporations and the rich. There is no fair tax system right now. The fact that people making $250,000 and less are paying more than millionaires and billionaires is absolutely unacceptable. We have to address this issue. It is certainly a federal issue, and I think that we can start by, in 2025, closing those loopholes. But those loopholes are not about the middle class and the working class. These are the corporations that are able to, in some cases, pay nothing in taxes, while someone who is trying to raise their 3 kids is paying $25,000, $40,000, $60,000 a year. The flat rate doesn't work, and we have to actually understand that if we want an equitable system, then you need an equitable tax system.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez, this next question starts with you. What, if any, steps should be taken by Congress to curb gun violence in our country?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are more guns in this country than there are people. And in Congress, my colleagues, many of them, protect guns more than they protect children. The fact is that we should be doing everything we possibly can to ensure that there is no more gun violence in schools, in neighborhoods, and all over the country. And yet, we feel like we're listening to the news every other day about another shooting. I think that we need to ban assault weapons. I also think that we have to do everything we can to establish the kind of programming that actually addresses violence. It's why I co-sponsored the bill that created the very first ever White House Office on Gun Violence Prevention, authored by Congressman Frost. And look, I think that we need to have common sense gun laws, but the fact that this Congress has not been willing to introduce and bring to the floor one bill to address this issue is unacceptable. It is why I have signed non-discharge petitions to ban assault weapons, and I continue to call all of my colleagues to love children and communities more than they love guns.
Same question, candidate Booras.
This question in particular poses a lot of difficulties, and I understand that it is extremely visceral for folks, especially as a father. I can very much appreciate gun violence when it comes to children in particular, but as a police officer, there is one thing that I can tell you definitively, that criminals simply do not fear the police and they do not fear laws. The only thing that criminals fear is when their prey stops being prey and fights back. In that sense, I tell you the following: we can go on and ban assault weapons all that we like, and although it would probably reduce a couple of large shootings, overall, it will not change the core problem that we have in this country. The gun violence is a symptom of a serious mental health problem that we have in the United States that we need to address immediately. These are things that I have anecdotally at least seen on the streets myself, and these are things that I can guarantee you every single, whether it's a mass shooter or any individual that takes a gun and points it at somebody and pulls a trigger, the one thing that they will all have in common is that there will be a mental health issue or mental health lapse through them all. The Second Amendment, at this point, protects weapons for a reason. And what I say is, instead of the federal government diving in to the symptom, the gun violence, right now what we should be doing is addressing the true problem, the mental health crisis that the United States has, which is forever growing. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Booras, this next question is for you. Do you think that Congress should pass federal legislation to either guarantee or restrict access to reproductive health services, including abortion?
I do not. I believe that reproductive rights are not a federal issue, as much as, again, I understand that this is an extremely visceral issue. It is something that people want to feel seen, want to feel heard about, and I can very much so appreciate that for everybody. But the Constitution specifically enumerates which rights are to be dealt to the states and which rights are to be kept by the federal government. The federal government is created to protect people, and in particular from violence, large amounts of fraud, these kinds of issues. States' rights are where these issues should lie. And when it comes to the Dobbs decision, whether you love it or hate it, what I can tell you, what constitutional scholars will tell you is that it's simply good law. The Supreme Court should not be adjudicating their view of the law, or excuse me, should not be creating law from the bench. They are not elected officials. They are not who we choose. This is something that if it were to take part in the federal government, needs to come from the electorate. It needs to come from Congress, from the Senate, and move up from there. So at this point, no. I believe that where we stand with the federal government not having the power to have to full on just either grant abortions or deny them, because if you give the federal government the power to do one, you in the future potentially give the federal government the power to do the other as well. It should be left to states' rights, just like Dobbs says.
Thank you. Same question, candidate Ramirez.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I believe that when it comes to a woman's right over her body, it should not be left to the states. We should be doing everything at the federal level to ensure that women have rights over their bodies. When the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, what they did is they left it to the states. Over 20 states right now have already banned abortion. So when we say leave it to the states, we're saying that if my niece lives in Alabama, she doesn't have rights over her body and reproductive rights. But if my niece lives in Illinois, in the state where I helped codify Roe v. Wade here, she has rights. There's something wrong with that. My niece cannot control, if she is a 16, 18, 21-year-old, that her elected government, made up of people who don't want to protect her rights, are taking them away from her, which is exactly why we have to codify Roe v. Wade at the national level. Look, Republicans would leave you to believe that freedom for Americans is to leave it to state. Women are dying when you're leaving it to the states. So what we have to do is, one, actually pass Roe v. Wade at the national level, and we should not allow elected officials to police your pregnancies, which is actually what Project 2025 and its 900-page manifesto wants to do as it pertains to reproductive freedoms. So look, this idea that it's not happening, they're already trying to do it right now in Congress. We have to make sure that we prioritize it, because women should have a right over their body, and we should be fighting for those freedoms, not taking them from them. And so that is why I'm a co-sponsor of the bill that would actually codify it, and I'm also a member of the caucus, of the pro-choice caucus, and the Equal Rights Amendment. Right now, women's rights are under attack, and we have people who believe leave it to the states, which really what they're saying is let a woman die in the other 20, 25, 30 states.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez, the next question is for you. What measures would you support to address immigration issues?
Yeah, let me start by saying I am the proud daughter of Guatemalan immigrants. My husband, up until a week and a half ago, was a dreamer. Came to the country at the age of 14, and up until a week and a half ago, we were able to adjust his status. I remember the moment, and I remember how it felt when I looked into his eyes and he showed me the USCIS email. It took us almost 4 years, and he's married to a US citizen. We have a broken immigration system, and we have to also address issues at the border. They're two separate issues. As the vice-ranking member of Homeland Security, I have launched the caucus on global migration because I think that when it comes to the border, we should be asking ourselves, what is causing so many people to be on the move at the global level, of which 1 of 14 end up in our border? And it's why I've been to the Darien. I've been to our southern border. I have gone in, I've talked to officers, and I understand that there is work to be done. But this Congress has refused to provide the funding to address the needs of people seeking asylum. And I've had to look into the face of a woman with a child, coming out of the Darien, coming out of the water, begging for help. And so we have work to do there. I also believe that we need to actually give work permits to people that have been in this country for 25, 30 years. As a matter of fact, $96.7 billion is what immigrants who are undocumented are paying into our taxes, of which 35% go to Social Security right now. I think that addressing immigration in this country is good for all of us. It's good for our economy. And it's also why I'm co-leading the Dream and Promise Act that creates a pathway to citizenship for dreamers. I can go on this forever. I know she's going to tell me to stop. But I believe that next Congress, we have to get this done. It's been since 1986 since we've passed anything related to immigration reform.
Thank you. Candidate Booras, your question.
Thank you. As far as immigration is concerned, the only serious problem that we have in this country is the illegal portion of the immigration. This constantly keeps getting, by many members in Congress, many members in the media, lumped into normal immigration. Folks, I'm the product of immigration. Thank God for immigration, because I love living in the United States, and I prefer living here over Greece any day of the year, despite the fact that Greece is considerably more beautiful, I would say. But still, it is something that I do not take lightly. But at the bottom line, I want to help people, but we are a country of laws. And at some point, we have to respect that fact. And we have the ability, instead of offering the $150 billion to all the illegal immigrants that have come over recently, $150 billion with a B dollars we have spent, and then some, to do what? To keep people in this static state over months, wondering if they're going to get work permits, wondering what they're going to eat the next day. This is wrong, not just for us as citizens, but it's wrong that we do this to them. What we can do is deputize immigration attorneys who are qualified. We can show them how to do this job, get them down to the border, move through the large chunk of these asylum cases, and then from there, we do have to respect the law and ensure that, whether it's Border Patrol, whether it's local law enforcement, that they begin to actually respect the law when it comes to these people and move them out. Now, when it comes to the Dreamers in particular, that's a very different group. They didn't come here through their own volition. They have likely gone to school here, worked here, and they live a life here. That's a conversation that we very much so need to have. And so that group I consider very different. Thank you.
Thank you. And this next question is for you as well, candidate Booras. Do you support continued U.S. military and financial support for Ukraine? Explain why or why not, and what, if any, changes you would propose to U.S. policy.
Thank you. I will always support aid when it comes to our allies. Whether the ally is Ukraine, whether the ally is Israel, there's a very real reason that we have to keep support of our allies strong. Now, at the same time, some of the things that have been going on in Ukraine are simply unacceptable when it comes to the amounts of money that we are giving that is unchecked. You cannot write blank checks that are going to feed certain corrupt politicians within that region. What I would like to see is continued military aid. I don't want us, as the United States, to send our troops in and boots on the ground. I don't want us to spend enormous amounts of money rebuilding Ukraine, and to that degree, as they would have us, as they would create and have us do. And what I would like to see is further strong efforts to genuinely negotiate peace in that region. It has been done, and we need people who can actually do the job. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Look, folks, Putin's war on Ukraine has been absolutely devastating. We have seen so many of the Ukrainian refugees here in Illinois, actually just about a mile east of the border of my eastern part of my district. So many Ukrainian families who have been living in fear since this war started, since this war criminal started the war on Ukraine. And so I do support funding Ukraine and Ukraine's ability to sustain and to be able to survive this and to end this war. It's why I have voted for support. And look, as I think about where we are today in Ukraine and that region, I recognize that the work that needs to be done to bring peace is not the work that we do in silo. This is work that we have to be doing with global partners. And Ukraine right now needs us and continues to need us because we also understand how interconnected we are. When there is a war on Ukrainians, there is a war on all of us. And I believe in the same way that I do about many other parts of the world, we have a shared humanity. And we also have a responsibility, not just to the Ukrainian refugees that are here that we should be helping, we should be supporting, and we should be reducing the backlog so that they can get resources, but to the people of Ukraine. I talk to them, they're my constituents. So yes, I fully support funding, and I also understand that we have a responsibility to also lead with diplomacy and to help us get to a place of peace. But Putin doesn't believe in peace.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez, this next question starts with you. Ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas have yet to bring results despite U.S. pressure to the diplomatic process. What is your position on continued U.S. military aid to Israel and the U.S. role to aid to Palestinian residents, and please explain why?
Yeah. It's been almost a year since October 7th. And unfortunately, folks, what I feared on October 8th, October 9th, October 10th is happening. We're at the brink of a regional war. I was one of the very first members of Congress who co-led a resolution saying, we have to lead with diplomacy, folks. We have to make sure that we prevent lives from dying, innocent civilians from dying. We have to prevent a regional war. We need to get the hostages home. And no child, regardless if they're Palestinian or Israeli, should die as a result of this war. And while we started with 12 of us, and I as one of the co-leads, now the president is helping negotiate a ceasefire. But in so many ways, it feels like we have spent so much money sending bombs that are killing children. And now you are seeing in Lebanon, and you're seeing all over the region, that we are so close to a war. I believe that there is no way to bomb ourselves into peace. And what's happening in the Middle East is interconnected with everything we care about. We've sent over 40,000 of our troops already to that region. We've seen settler violence in the West Bank, Americans who have died. And so I am around the clock on the phone with the State Department. And I have voted against military funding for Israel because I don't think we can bomb ourselves to peace. I think we need humanitarian aid, and I think that we have to require that the Prime Minister of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu, abide by international law, which he has consistently violated every single day since this war has started. I believe that Israeli security and peace is interconnected with Palestinian security and peace, and we will only get there through diplomacy and a permanent ceasefire.
Thank you. Candidate Booras, your question.
As I said with Ukraine, I am a firm believer that we must absolutely give support to our allies, and Israel is our ally. The number one factor as to why this war is continuing is Hamas, folks. And we have in this country, unfortunately, members of Congress and of the Senate who have actually shown open support for Hamas. That is unacceptable. Hamas is a violent, dangerous terror organization that threatens not only Israel, but threatens its own Palestinian citizens. And what talks of peace can you give to a group that is living a war even when there is a ceasefire going on? Someone like Hamas must absolutely be obliterated in order for any of this to end. I do not say that lightly. I very much so recognize the plight of Palestinian civilians. And again, I don't say that lightly. It absolutely needs to end. That is an area that has been warring, and those two particular groups have been warring for well over 200 years. This is far before World War II and the creation of Israel. And so I have been to the area, I've spoken to both sides, and I can tell you that this is extremely personal and visceral for them. The only way that we will be able to come to a conclusion for that war is to remove Hamas from the equation and then have both sides sit down and discover exactly how they're going to move forward peacefully. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Booras, this question starts with you. As a representative from a Great Lakes state, what measures do you support to safeguard the availability of clean water for drinking, agricultural, and other needs?
Thank you. So I am very much a fan of clean water in particular, especially when it comes to being in my home. My wife is actually sitting in the audience. You can ask her, I'm quite the stickler on it. But for all of us, we have one enormous benefit when it comes to being Chicagoans, being in Illinois. We have the Great Lakes Compact, which allows for our drinking water, which is probably the highest quality in America, if you ask me, to stay as our drinking water, except in cases of emergencies. I would very much so continue to see that strengthen. The law was signed in 2008. I would love to see that continue to be the case. And that's something that I would also like to double down and work with the EPA on to continue seeing that we have clean water available and that we make it available to all people. If we have any harmful toxins in the water, things like sodium fluoride that need to start being discussed more on a federal level, those things, we have to now instill processes to have those removed and to ensure that everybody living in the United States has access and gets clean water.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez.
Thank you. I have to correct something. I think it's really important. As I mentioned too, I am the vice ranking member of Homeland Security. So I am fortunate to be able to be in a lot of the rooms with a lot of the intelligence that, oftentimes is not shared as directly or as often as it should be. But I want to start by saying that it is very dangerous when candidates or other members of Congress and politicians or wanting to be politicians begin calling members of Congress Hamas supporters. I think it's really important to note that. The hate rhetoric that we are seeing in this country has real consequences. Wadea Al-Fayumi, just a couple miles from here, was stabbed to death because he's Palestinian, a 6-year-old boy. Every time remarks like that are made, there are calls to my office with death threats. I do not know one Hamas supporting member of Congress, and I think it's really important for candidates and elected officials to be very careful with the words that they use. Now, we can talk about annexations, we can talk about the threat of violence, and we can certainly talk about where right now that negotiation is. The reality is that the Prime Minister of Israel is unwilling to negotiate on the ceasefire deal because he's not willing to agree on a state for Palestine. That is the facts, and I'm happy to talk about that after, but please, folks, I think it's important that we stop using this dangerous rhetoric. It has real consequences, especially for women of color. With that said, I am the co-sponsor of the Green New Deal, and I think it's really important that this Congress and next Congress makes climate change an absolute priority for clean air and clean water. I am proud of Illinois. I was in the state legislature when we passed a lot of the legislation that's made our water among the best in the nation. But we have to also do that at the federal level, and it is why I'm supporting the legislation to do it.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez, this next question starts with you. What, if anything, should the federal government do to provide equitable, quality education for all children?
Yeah. We should pass campaign finance reform legislation so people don't spend $18 million on campaigns and put that money into public education. I'm being kind of funny here, but it's true, actually. I mean, look, the reality is that education funding should be among our priorities. But every single budgeting season, we are talking about slashing funds. I mean, we right now have a continuing resolution through December 20th. Part of why we're in this continuing resolution, we couldn't even pass a budget, is because they're talking about slashing safety nets and slashing education funding. When we should be talking about how do we make sure that the federal government is working with the state and local municipalities, and we are not so over-dependent on property taxes to fund education. It is why I'm working around the clock to ensure that we protect every dollar for education, but not just protect it. Folks, it is the best use and the best return of investment when we actually fund education. I want to make sure that kids in Addison Trail High School and kids in Belmont Cragen and kids in Glen Ellen and kids in West Chicago have the same quality education. But having been up and down this district, I would tell you that if we don't prioritize this at the federal level, we're not going to be there. We need to remove the disparity, and it starts with the federal government, and certainly at the state level, we pass education funding formulas, but at the rate that we're going at the state, It'll take us till 2040 until we're able to fully fund our schools in the state of Illinois, which is exactly why the federal government has to step in, and it is why I refuse to vote for any bill on budget that would slash funding for education.
Thank you. Candidate Booras.
So when it comes to the federal government, education in particular is not something that they have done particularly well. Since the federal government has been involved in any kind of national education, education has simply gone down in this country. What the federal government could do, should do, what I would like to see it do is help bolster states so that states can provide better quality education for their constituency. I do agree that there is a large disparity when it comes to schools and the quality that gets put into those programs, and I do believe that maybe the federal government is a way, but not by partaking any further than simply giving grants or bringing down some money to the states to allow them to bolster those programs themselves. Otherwise, once the federal government gets involved, the one thing that we see is that there is a lot of waste and that it simply is not done correctly. People locally understand what their children need better than somebody that's sitting in Washington. And I think we need to reinforce that for people. We need to believe in people. We need to trust in people locally. We need to go to our communities, and we can enforce that there.
Thank you. The next question starts with you, Candidate Booras. Do you believe that Congress has the authority to issue and/or enforce a Supreme Court ethics code? If so, should it do so?
I don't believe that Congress has the authority to enforce a Supreme Court ethics code. I want to qualify that and ensure that everybody realizes I don't mean acts that are criminal, brazen, things like that. But it's once you give, there's a separation of powers for a reason, right? And it ensures that the Supreme Court is able to do its job, and all 9 justices have been doing that at this point all the way up till now. There are no justices that have gone to some degree, whether they're liberal, conservative, or anything in between, that have gone to some degree where we need the federal government to simply step in and police that. The creation of those kinds of ethics and guidelines would start off sounding okay, but who gets to determine exactly what gets factored into that and what doesn't? Does the fact that there is a House majority that are Democrats change those ethics and guidelines one year? Does the fact that there's a House majority that there's of Republicans change that? That's not what this separation of powers was for in the Constitution. We are better off as a nation by keeping that separate and not enforcing an ethics code of that nature.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez.
Yeah. I guess the question is, if Congress can codify ethics for the Supreme Court, then who can? Because I don't think the American people feel like the Supreme Court these days is actually in their corner. This is the highest court, and this is the same place that has taken the rights from women. This is the same court that has said, well, he appointed me to the Supreme Court, so, I'm going to make it possible where it doesn't matter what a sitting president or a former president has done, we're going to give him full immunity. This is the same court that has members of the Supreme Court who are taking bribes, and there is no consequence for that. There's a consequence if we do it, as there should be. There's a consequence if you do it, as there should be. But how come the Supreme Court can do whatever the heck it wants with no checks and balances? Which is exactly why I believe that the first thing we should be doing is talking about term limits. I mean, it is ridiculous. They're there, and then they can be there for 20, 30, 40 years as the appointee of whoever put them in that position. There are real consequences, folks. We are living them. We are feeling them. And it is exactly why I'm co-sponsoring a number of pieces of legislation that specifically address the ethics violations of our Supreme Court. And I think that all of us should be supporting that. If you believe that this should be the high court of morality for us, then it should be accountable to its people, not to the president that appointed them.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez, this next question starts with you. What, if anything, should Congress do to ensure quality health care at an affordable cost for all?
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. The fact that people have to think about, can I afford to go to my primary physician, is ridiculous. I've had the opportunity to travel around the world, and I know that we are great in many ways. But when it comes to healthcare, we should be embarrassed of ourselves. It doesn't matter if you're 65 or if you're 45 or if you're 25, you should be able to access quality healthcare, and money should not be the impediment to that. I can tell you that having a mother who is 63 years old on Social Security, and so is her husband, my father, who's retired and now in his 70s, and having to navigate the marketplace, that there is a lot of disparity when it comes to healthcare in this country. I am co-sponsoring the Medicare for All bill. I believe that we need to reform Medicare because it is not working for our people right now. And the Medicare system should be one that is of high quality and access for all. But the idea that you can't, that the idea of an emergency room can mean a bankruptcy, that's not the country that we say we love. That's not the country that I love. And so we have a responsibility. And you'll hear me talk a lot about campaign finance reform, but if you see the lobbyists, not just pharma, but these insurance lobbyists that are in the ear of my colleagues, who are the reason we can't bring to the floor legislation that makes healthcare affordable in this country, that shouldn't be allowed. And yet it is. And so for me, when we talk about healthcare, I expanded healthcare coverage in the state of Illinois when I was in the state legislature. And what we found was it was actually more affordable for the state to do that than to have to help someone who now has pancreatic cancer and wasn't able to go to the doctor to get the preventive care or the care they needed before. I think healthcare should be a #1 priority for this country.
Thank you. Candidate Booras, your question.
Thank you. And this issue in particular is very close to my heart because unfortunately, the described scenario that Congresswoman Ramirez said is exactly what happened to my family. My father had no health care because he was a small business owner 20 years ago, had a very serious issue come up, and we had to file bankruptcy, which put us on government assistance for quite a few years, I would say. So it very much so hurts on that sense. I would very much like to see healthcare expanded towards everyone. I don't believe that the federal government always does the best job of it when it comes to Medicare and Medicaid. There are serious issues with these programs. I do believe that we need to start looking into the private sector with federal funding coming to it in various ways, shapes, and forms in order to promote healthcare for all. What we don't want to happen is to move too fast and end up having systems like Canada's or other socialized medicine systems where people are waiting 3, 4, 6 months, sometimes over a year to see primary care physicians, where the waiting lists in a place like Canada, for example, are so long that now they've incorporated euthanasia as a way for people to get over the pain of not being able to actually go in and see their doctors. So when it comes to healthcare, yes, it's something that's a big pain point, but it needs to be done right. Otherwise, it ends up looking like a disaster the way that Canada's looks. Thank you.
Thank you. This next question is our last question, and it will be for you, Candidate Booras. Do you support measures to make the criminal justice process more equitable by identifying and addressing any systematic bias? If so, what measures do you propose or support?
If there are, if there is systematic bias, of course we should address it. But at the same time, as a former police officer, I can tell you that these are statistics that we have had to look through, comb through, delve through in order to do our jobs the right way. Especially, and I'll be the first to tell you, there are definitely officers who, might not necessarily do the job at the level that we would all like, but the majority of the police, the majority of law enforcement are great people doing great work. And when it comes to criminal justice reform, we cannot simply look at statistics. We have to look at the driving factors of those statistics. So to allow, for example, like Cook County does, many violent offenders, many domestic batterers, people who are dangerous, to simply walk out on their own recognizance is unacceptable. If it's something like a drug charge, especially if they weren't selling, those kinds of things, we can understand, and we've always been understanding that those are folks where, as long as they don't pose a threat to themselves, can be allowed to do so. But if we're talking about equitable reform looking the way that Cook County has looked over the last 10, 15 years or so, that is unacceptable. And I'll tell you right now, that does nobody any benefits. What we should be looking into are what the DuPage County Sheriff's Office is doing. Forms of to not recidivize, to get people job skills, to get people life skills where they can actually go out and contribute to society, while at the same time ensuring that violent offenders don't have the options to go out and commit more violent crimes in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Ramirez.
Yeah. So I think the criminal justice system needs to be reformed. I think that there's a correlation when 80% of the people in prison are of one color. And I think we need to talk about what are the kind of biases in the system, and how do we get to the root causes of violence? Like, what is causing the violence that we are seeing in DuPage, in Chicago, and all over the country? And I think that it should be our responsibility to ask ourselves, what are we doing to build more safer communities? How is the criminal justice system working, and how is it not working? And when are we incarcerating people based on racial biases? And why is it that we're not spending more money in investing in communities, addressing issues of youth unemployment, addressing issues of schools that are completely defunded? So to me, when I think about public safety, I think it's a public health issue, and we should be treating it that way. And when I think about the criminal justice system, having been a caseworker for a number of years and working with people who were coming home and saying, I want to get a job, I want to get housing, I want to reunite my family, and then finding out that they couldn't get housing because they had a background, that they couldn't get a job because of that background, and that they couldn't reunify with their family because if they were living in subsidized housing, they couldn't live with them. To me, tells me that it is a system where we're not addressing the issues and we're not reducing recidivism. And so I do think there's biases, and it's exactly why I'm co-sponsoring the Break the Cycle of Violence Act bill that begins to address the issue.
Thank you. It is now time for closing statements. Candidate Ramirez, you have 2 minutes for your closing statement.
Look, folks, up and down the ballot, voters have a clear choice this November. And I think you need to ask yourself, having seen what you've seen in Congress, watching what you're seeing in the news, what you're hearing in your neighborhoods, what kids are telling you that they're hearing at school, what kind of country do we want to live in? Do we want to be in a country that's rooted in hope, in service to our neighbors, that is protecting people's civil liberties? Or do we want another 4 years or 4 years of fear, of division, of threats to our democratic institutions, of people who tell you, I only need you to vote one more time, you won't have to vote after this? Do we want to elect principled leaders that are working for you, that don't take corporate PAC contributions, that are bringing back money in their first year, by the way, almost more money than most of the rest of the delegation? Someone that is passing legislation and building bipartisan support, someone that helped author the executive order that's going to keep families together if you're married to a U.S. citizen? Or do you want someone that's leaving it to the states? Just leave it to the states. If women die, leave it to the states. Education funding, leave it to the states. Folks, I've been in the state legislature. Here in Illinois, we've done some good work. I've also been in Texas. I've also been in Alabama. I've also been in Ohio. We can't leave our democracy and our future merely to the states. So to me, it is important that we continue to do the work that we've already began. And I have spent the last 2 years working for you up and down this district. I intend to do that if you give me the opportunity for the next 2 years. And if we were able to do what we were able to do in this minority, I hope that if there is clear leadership this next Congress, that I can do a lot more for this district and always represent you.
Thank you. Candidate Booras, your closing 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to start off by saying this. If I am to be attacked for wanting the Constitution to stay strong so that everybody's rights could stay strong, for wanting to do the right thing, the hard thing, the right way, then so be it. Please go ahead and continue throwing the attacks on me, because there is one thing that I will promise to everybody in this room. I cannot be bought, I cannot be bullied, and I will not be swayed. I promise you the following, that if you were to vote for me, what you will get is somebody in Congress who you will always feel seen by, always feel heard by, who you will always be able to have a transparent conversation by, somebody who takes no big money from anyone, and whom I encourage everyone to do their research on that in particular. Because when you do take big money from any side in particular, you are beholden to the people who give you that. And I have zero interest to be beholden to anyone but you, the constituents. My name is John Booras. I'm asking for your support today and in this election to ensure that we can move forward together the right way. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the community, thank you for being with us this evening. Also, thank you to the City of Wheaton Communications Department for their support in the presentation of this forum. Our democracy thrives when all of us are engaged. Attending or watching a candidate forum is an excellent way to be empowered to join the discussions on local issues and make your voice heard on Election Day. We hope that each and every one of you will vote and inspire your family, friends, and neighbors to do the same. A recording of this forum will be posted on the League of Women Voters website and also on the websites of other leagues within the Congressional 3rd District. Candidates, we wish the very best on the campaign trail. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.